Born on November 19, 1600 in Dunfermline Palace in Scotland, King Charles I of England was the second son of King James VI of Scotland and of Denmark. King Charles had two siblings, his sister Elizabeth and his brother Henry. Charles was born with an illness called rickets which weakened his ankles. Charles also developed speech slower than his siblings. Charles received a classical education from Thomas Murray, a Presbyterian. Charles was shy, introverted, and devoted to his family. At the age of 5, Charles was given the title of Duke of York and became a Knight of the Bath. Charles was really close to his older brother, Henry, but in 1612 Henry died from typhoid. Charles was very lonely after his brother's death and after his sister left England to marry Frederick V, Elector of the Rhine-Palatinate. Charles became King of England and Scotland in 1625 after his father, James VI, died. During the rule of Charles, he had his first meeting with the Parliament. The common people wanted answers for the failed success of the Spanish War. Charles could not give a good answer to the common people's worries, and instead would tax them and demand loans to pay for wars. The Parliament were tired of being used for their money, so they made Petition of Right, which stopped Charles from taxing them without the Parliament's consent and stopped Charles from imprisoning someone without cause. In 1639, Charles got involved into a war with the Scots. Because of this, in April 1640, Charles called for a parliament, known as the Short Parliament, to raise money for the war against Scotland. Shortly after this meeting with the Parliament, the Scottish invaded the border, starting the Battle of Newburn. This led to Charles calling another parliament, called the Long Parliament, which met in November 1640. After this, the Triennial Act was made, which ensured the meeting of Parliament every 3 years. Charles also agreed that the Parliament could not be dissolved without its own consent. November 22, 1641, the Commons passed a grand remonstrance to the king, which talks about all the things that had gone wrong since Charles became king. The common people were tired of how Charles treated them and decided to start a civil war. The defenders of Charles lost the war to the commoners, and Charles I was captured. Charles was then put on trial for treason in a specially constituted High Court of Justice in Westminster Hall. Charles I was found guilty of treason and other crimes and was sentenced to death. Charles was executed on January 30, 1649, outside the banqueting hall of Whitehall. Although Charles wasn't a great king, he still had a big impact on England. Charles led the Parliament to make the Petition of Rights, which has stopped kings from taking advantage of the common people by taxing them without the Parliament's consent and imprisoning someone without cause. Charles also passed the Triennial Act. This act ensured that the meeting of the Parliament would take place every 3 years. This made sure the common people had a voice in the government and how the king rules.